While I'm not the oldest person here, I believe I knew Dad longer and better than anyone else here. So, just as it was up to me to be his caregiver and advocate for the last 5 years of his life, now it's up to me to tell you about that life with a chronological overview from beginning to end. Dad was born in Brooklyn, May 26, 1923, and attended Erasmus Hall High School, where he skipped 6 times, a total of 3 grades. He had just turned 15 when he graduated, came to graduation in short pants, and had the distinction as a child of being rated number 2 in IQ tests in all of New York State. The train he took to Harvard College for freshman orientation was derailed in the Great Hurricane of 1938. Storm's beginning. Second youngest in his class of 1,200. He was one of very few Jews at Harvard. About 15% was his estimate because of the quotas in effect there then. In fact, when I took him to his 75th reunion in 2017, he was one of only 10 classmates there. "You made the minyan," I told him. And then I had to explain to the others what that meant because none of them were Jewish. Shy about dating older women, Dad told me he spent most of his time in the chem labs or on the picket lines, the latter as a member of the Young Communist League at Harvard. At Arthur Kanoy's suggestion, he became secretary of the Avuka, the predecessor of Hillel, becoming in fact the only member of both of those organizations, and seemed destined for a life of progressive Jewish activism, peacemaking, and counseling. He was the last stand second violinist in the Harvard Orchestra, also known as the Pierian Sodality of 1808, America's oldest musical organization, and then took up the viola and became first stand second chair. There are viola jokes I won't go into. Though he never really learned the viola clef, he pretended to be playing in third position with the violin, and then, of course, struggled with accidentals. So in the Dvorak piano quartet he played with me, which sometimes has 6 flats, he had a rough time, but he worked hard at it. Conductors Ralph Allen Dale and Frank Verbsky, just yesterday, told me that he was a great asset playing in their Long Island community orchestras. Professionally, Dad was a psychiatrist, rose to the level of clinical director at Kingsborough Psychiatric Center, and was even nominated for the post of State Commissioner of Mental Health by a rabbi, as a matter of fact. As a musician, Dad never pretended to be more than a good amateur, but because he played the viola, he got to play quartets with some top-notch players like Arnie Schubert, Frank Carbonara, and other professionals at our house in Roslyn. As a child, I frequently remember falling asleep to live chamber music, and he taught me how to practice. If you play something wrong, you've learned it wrong. So you have to play it right twice. And if you play it wrong again, you have to play it right 4 times, and so on, exponentially. He also told me not to worry about exams. After all, he'd say, "The worst you can get on a test is 0, and that's nothing." There's no such thing as an old joke if you haven't heard it. But the best thing that ever happened to him at Harvard, or anywhere else for that matter, was his meeting my mother. She was 3 years behind him in school, but almost 3 months older and wiser. Right? On Friday the 13th of February 1942, Friday the 13th has always been a lucky day in our family, he played the violin at a Valentine's Day dance in Boston where my mother, who had immigrated from Leningrad in 1935, spoke on behalf of Russian war relief, where she was junior division president. He fell in love with her immediately, bet his roommate that he would marry her, and after a couple of dates, proposed to her on the phone. Since he was not yet 21, she asked him if he'd asked his parents' permission. He said no, and she laughed. "But we were engaged," he would trumpet as he told this story many times. And on June 18th, 1944, 12 days after my mother became a U.S. citizen on D-Day, and 23 days after his 21st birthday, he did marry her. His roommate sent him $5 as a wedding present in fulfillment of the bet. Which, as a certain senator from Vermont would say, is a lot of money in those days. My mother loved music, could follow a score. She was my best page turner and had a great sense of rhythm. She was quite a dancer too, but had vocal trouble carrying a tune. And my father loved Russian culture, but struggled learning that language. So what did they have in common? Politics. And the resolve to change the world for the better. Tikkun olam. Right, Josh?
Correct.
Right. My father's mother feared that their marrying so young might hinder my father's medical career, but my parents waited 5 years to have me, and that's one of the reasons they became lifelong supporters of Planned Parenthood. Dad's medical school was paid for by the Army, but then he had to serve for 2 years at Fort Riley, Kansas, in what my parents called the dead center of the country, with the emphasis on the word dead. In fact, the only good thing to come out of there, my father would say, was me. In 1950, when I was a year old, they came back to New York. Dad became a psychoanalyst, following in the footsteps of his father's cousin, Philip Lehrman, who had studied with Freud, and who he realized many years later had probably had some influence on his getting into Harvard. But Dad soon became disillusioned with both Marx and Freud, realizing how much one could learn from, but also be misled by each of these gods that failed. Instead, he rediscovered Judaism, treasuring particularly its yearning for social justice and its moral codes. On August 28, 1963, he took me to the March on Washington, where we heard Dr. King's speech of the century at the Lincoln Memorial. 3 years later, my teacher, Elie Siegmeister, composed his I Have a Dream cantata based on that speech. On January 15, 1989, I conducted the Manhattan premiere at the Harlem School of the Arts with my newly formed Metropolitan Philharmonic Chorus, whose members included Helene Williams, her son, Ben Spearman, Nancy Zucker, Josh Minkin, and Dad, who was also our major funder through the foundation he'd set up and then dedicated to the memory of his younger brother, who died of a brain tumor in 1986, age 60. The Professor Edgar H. Lehrman Memorial Foundation for Ethics, Religion, Science, and the Arts. The work of that foundation has co-produced hundreds of concerts and recordings since then, and will continue with Vice President Nancy, now as acting president. This year's major project will be the New York premiere of the Butstein-Lehrman opera Sacco and Vanzetti, September 13th at Hofstra and October 18th at Community Church in New York. That opera was actually my 9th of 12 to date, and I realized this as I looked at it last night. Dad attended at least one performance, beginning with the premiere of every single one of those operas. In Ithaca, in New Jersey, in Manhattan in a snowstorm, at Lake George, Westport, Connecticut, Indiana, even in Heidelberg, Germany. He was always there. The librettist for my penultimate opera, The Triangle Fire, which a number of you sang in, Ellen Frankel, last night wrote me about Dad. I feel honored to have met your father and to have spent a little time with him in your company. He was certainly an engaged and curious man, active until the end of his life. I was impressed by how eager he was to participate in your activities and stay with it. I was also impressed by your caring attention to him, eager to engage him in what mattered to you. You obviously learned much from each other. May the memories you have of him bring you comfort as you mourn and keep him close, and may God comfort you and all those who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. Dad wrote hundreds of letters and papers. 175 of them were published. The first draft of his autobiography, Me and Psychiatry, is 157 pages long. He also signed a contract for and worked on a great deal on a book titled Getting Away with Murder, The Insanity Defense as a Mask for Terrorism, with chapters on John Hinckley, Mark David Chapman, and others. I told him a publisher was interested in my memoirs, but I couldn't finish them by my 70th birthday last August, since I was working with him on his. So I'd have to aim for my 75th birthday, but I really wanted him to be around to read them. Don't worry, he said. I'll be around. And I wanted to believe him. And I guess in a certain way, He will be around. I'll feel his spirit at least watching me saying, good, or don't say that, or cheerfully. I'll miss you, Dad. I've missed our playing as a nearly unbeatable tennis doubles team where you smashed everything at the net while I ran around covering 3/4 of the court. I'll miss swimming with you. I have to do it one more time with the picture. 2 weeks ago. Taking you to concerts, listening, singing, playing, and sharing new music with you. When on Valentine's Day, this coming Valentine's Day, Helene and I premiere the song cycle I wrote on Romanian poems, which, Dad, you were the first to hear when she sang, and I played it for you. Our performance will be in your memory. I won't miss all the doctors I've been taking you to for 5 years. The urologist, the neurologist, the cardiologist, the gastroenterologist, the retinologist, the ophthalmologist, the optician, the low vision associate, the dentist, and the PCP. Sounds like there was all of them. Dad used to sing, I'm forever seeing doctors. Well, during the time I would have spent doing that, I'll work on your memoirs, put them in order, and then write mine, dedicated to you.